All right, let's get started. First of all, welcome everybody to our session. In the next 45 minutes, we will discuss a couple of best practices concerning some common components that are used in a virtual apps and desktop environment. My name is Dennis Span. I work for a large insurance company in Vienna in Austria. I've been working with Citrix technology for more than 15 years. I'm a Citrix architect and recently a Citrix CTP, which is quite an honor. CTPs, thank you. I'm also the author of a blog called DennisSpan.com, and since I got this question about 100 times in the last 3 days, I'm 6'8". Okay?
Hi, I'm David Wilkinson. I work for a company called Novosco based out of Belfast. I've been working with Citrix technology for 15 plus years. I'm also currently a CTP in the last 6 months. I author a blog called WolkieIT.com and Twitter handle WolkieIT.
Hi everyone, my name is George Spears. I work in the same company as David, Novosco, out of Belfast. I'm a Citrix technology professional. I run the blog jjspears.com and my Twitter handle is @jjspears. So we'll move on into the agenda. So we already know today we're talking about tips and best practices, and the technologies we're going to focus on is Office 365, profile management, app layering, optimizations and sealing, Google Chrome, and WEM. So let's get started.
Thanks, George. So we're going to talk about Office 365. Who is in the journey on Office 365? You could raise your hand. Yeah, pretty good response. That's good. So you'll enjoy these slides. So there's 3 main challenges around Office 365 and deploying it within a Citrix virtual environment. The Outlook cache, the OST file. So the traditional online mode isn't really recommended anymore. Microsoft don't recommend it, Citrix don't recommend it. So that Outlook OST cache file has to exist somewhere within your virtual environment, and it pretty much brings back what PST killed us 10 years ago. So we now have to fix the same issue that was there 10 years ago. OneDrive for Business, we know that there is 1 terabyte of available data that we all love. So it's a challenge in a virtual environment. Where do you put that 1 terabyte? How do you get around that? How do you access it? It creates headaches. And then finally 3, so the Outlook search roaming. So whenever a user is searching their mailbox in a virtual environment, especially non-persistent, how do they get that search index? Does it roam between sessions? Do you have to rebuild it? So those are the 3 main challenges around Office 365. They're not the only challenges. There's Teams and so on there, but we'll cover these 3. So choosing the right product. There's many products out there to actually solve, I guess, those challenges. We'll cover the Citrix products. So we've got app layering. We have 2, I guess, solutions within app layering: Office 365 user layers. And Office 365 user layer and user layers. So if you look at the icons, they represent what they actually solve. So Office 365 user layer covers off the Outlook OST cache, where the user layer itself can actually cover off Outlook OST, OneDrive for Business, and the search index, just with a small caveat that it needs to be persistent on that user layer. We have Citrix User Profile Management, so 7.18 or above. It was announced actually this time last year in Synergy, the support for Outlook, OST, and search indexing. Just be careful of the version of search index, especially around User Profile Manager. It needs to meet with what the Citrix currently support. And then, of course, there is other products out there, as there always is, to solve these problems. I began the journey 3 years ago in Office 365 in a Citrix environment, and there wasn't as many options as this. So, today we've got the Microsoft FS Logic, Office 365 containers, Avanti Workspace, Liquidware, VMware, and so on. So there are options out there, and understanding the limitations of each and understanding what your business actually needs to deliver. Not everybody will want the combination of all 3 to be delivered, so it's really choosing the right product for you. So if we go through some tips around Office 365 and Outlook, so how do you get around that OST cache? If you've got a gig mailbox or 10 gig mailbox, where does the OST sit and how can you limit that? Here's how. So you can reduce the sync period of the actual Outlook cache itself. And an example here on the screen on the right-hand side, you can see there's 3 days have been selected. So that's 3 days worth of mail that's stored in your Outlook OST. So there's obviously advantages around how much local storage that you would require versus storing everything. So, and that reduces obviously the local storage that your IT department have to provide. So the network and the storage impact around that. So field tests have shown, delivering these container-based solutions, the 300 plus IOPS are generated for the actual initial creation. So consider spreading out onboarding around this, because 300 is a lot if you have a lot of users and they're all logging in, and this is creating a lot of bottlenecks in the environment. And then from a concurrency point of view and Office 365, there's an average of 5 write IOPS as well as 8 read IOPS. So consider your concurrent users and what your storage needs to provide in order for no issue with performance. Ensure that the appropriate permissions is granted to the actual VHD directory. So there's different permissions required other than user profile management in order to allow that VHD to create. So double check your permissions are set properly. And again, we recommend always using cache mode, and it's both recommended by Microsoft and Citrix. So the search index, why? So we've probably all heard in the keynote speech, experience is key. The end user is king, to be honest. Why do you need to roam the search index? Because it rebuilds every time if you don't roam it, in which case you'll have a degraded performance. When actually searching something, it'll take longer, and actually it'll create more issues with performance on your VDAs, although it does take a step back. So the search service, quick tip around Windows 2012 R2, it's not actually enabled by default, so you need to actually enable it on that version of Windows, set it to automatic, and make sure that it's running, and make sure that no other provisioning tools actually go and disable anything. So you'll see the provisioning services will disable the Windows search service, which means your Outlook cache doesn't roam. And if we look at the before option, if you don't roam your index, as soon as the session starts, you'll see that it begins indexing. And that could take a considerable amount of time depending on how much mailbox data you have. So your search and performance will be degraded when you're looking for an email. So if you implement any of the solutions that do your roaming index, you see then whenever you log into the session, you can see that everything is actually being carried with it, and you can go in straight away into Outlook and search for your mail without any issue. So OneDrive for Business, one of the tips is to ensure that you enable files on demand. So that's pretty key. It's like the sync period in Outlook. There's 1 terabyte of data there. How do you reduce that on a local storage? Ensure that only that tick box of save space and download files as you use them is selected. That means anything that you access is downloaded. Anything you don't access isn't actually cached, which can save a considerable amount of space. And then there's other options with Citrix files, or share files as previously known, the personal cloud connector to OneDrive for Business via that product, which works on an on-demand basis as well. So, hand it over to George.
Thanks, David. So now we're going to go into tips and best practices for profile management. If you take a look at the picture at the top of the screen, you can see the impact of a 10-second increase in logons. So here we look at 1,000 logons with a 10-second increase, results in 2.7 hours of lost productivity. So that highlights the criticality of logon time and making sure they're as low as possible. Some tips to keep logons as low as possible: exclude as much from the profile as you can. The smaller a profile is going to be, the quicker it loads. And you can do that via folder redirection, redirecting as much of the profile as possible. You can exclude app data local, something I recommend. If you need folders within the app data local to be present, you can create specific inclusions. And Citrix have some default exclusion lists for files and registry keys that you can enable to keep them out of the profile as well. Container-based technologies is probably the future of profiles management. Historically or traditionally, we've used file-based technologies such as Roam of Profiles and Citrix Profile Management. But the enterprise is moving towards this container-based approach because it's easier to manage a container, and they generally offer better logon times as well. So essentially, a container-based technology for profiles is your profile is stored in a VHDX disk, which is then stored on the network. FS Logics have been doing this for many years. Microsoft just acquired those guys to help with the Windows Virtual Desktop technology that they're deploying. Monitoring your profiles closely. A profile server that has high CPU, high RAM, constrained IOPS is going to cause massive logon times. Your desktops could even hang. So make sure that you're proactively monitoring your profile servers. The Start menu tile, especially in Windows 10, understand it. I suggest using an XML file to define the tiles that appear in your Start menu. You have the option of defining the tiles at an administrative level and allowing users to define their own tiles, or you can block users from defining their own tiles. And also, if you're using profile management, make sure that the profile management version you run is supported with the VDA version that you run. So if, for example, you're looking to upgrade from Windows 10 1803 or higher, just double check that the profile management version that you have is compatible with that as well. Citrix have created a couple of policies that help drive down logon times. 2 of those is large file handling and profile containers. They do similar things. Large file handling is available in SYN App, SYN Desktop 7.16 and above, and essentially allows you to pick any number of files, put it in this policy here, and when users log on to their desktop, rather than the file caching or streaming to the desktop, a symbolic link is created from the VDA to the profile server. Another feature is the profile containers. It's newer. It's available in 1903 of virtual apps and desktops and above. It essentially lets you define a set of folders that you can place in a container, and that will drive down logon times as well. And finally, logon exclusion check. If we take the scenario where you've deployed Citrix Profile Management and you later discover that there's lots of Skype for Business log files in every user's profile, which takes up a lot of space, traditionally you would use PowerShell scripts to remove all those files from the profile store, but you can use what this policy setting is called logon exclusion check to do one of 2 things. You can either keep the log files on the profile store, but don't synchronize them or cache them to the Citrix desktop, or you can actually completely delete the files. So when a user logs on the next time, those log files will completely disappear from the profile store, and you'll reclaim your free space.
All right. In the following section, we will take a look at some of the optimizations that are definitely very, very interesting in a virtual apps and desktops environment, both the image and more, as well as image sealing. The traditional image creation process basically starts with an operating system. Then, of course, you have your Microsoft stack plus other vendors, anything from antivirus components or visual runtimes. Then, of course, you have the Citrix stack, which may depend a little bit on whether you deploy using PVS or you use machine creation services. Then, of course, one of the biggest parts are the applications. And then, of course, the 2 last sections concern optimization of the image and, at the end, the sealing of the image.
So, optimizations. Why do we do optimizations? We do it for better performing desktops, lower logon times, lower RAM, CPU, and increased user density, so more users and desktops per hypervisor host. If we take the example to the left of the screen, essentially what I've done here is built a Server 2016 VDA vanilla and done nothing else. I've tested 3 logon times. You can see those times range from 67 to 70 seconds. Then afterwards, I've applied my Windows Server 2016 logon script, and you can see that logons straight away drop, on average by 30 seconds. So this really highlights the importance of optimizations. So what is optimization? It's the act of making an operating system as effective as it can possibly be. We do that by disabling services, such as the FAQ service, schedule tasks, schedule defrag, disable it, get rid of some UWP apps like Xbox app, registry tweaks, and then a various number of miscellaneous optimizations like disabling system recovery. There are a number of available methods today for logon optimizations. The first one is the Citrix optimizer. I don't know if Martin Sugak is here, but credit to him and his team for this tool. It's great. There's a number of templates available, ranging from Server 2012 to 2019, and various Windows 10 optimization templates as well. My co-presenter, Dennis, has created a Windows Server 2016 template and a how-to, because you can create your own templates for this tool. My co-presenter, David, has created scripts from Windows Server 2016 and Windows 10, and I have also created scripts for Windows Server 2012, 2016, and Windows 10. Some of these scripts and tools are more aggressive than others, but we have all used these either ourselves or with customers, so we can validate all these methods.
Now, image optimization is very important, but when you're building a race car, you don't just look at the engine. It's all about a holistic view that you want to maintain. Also, in this case, when it comes to a Citrix environment, let's for example, start with group policies. I think most of us, or many of us, will be using group policies. One of these sort of, let's say, guidelines is to use as few as possible. Now, the question is always, what does that mean? A few, I mean 5, 10, or 15. Nobody will really answer or be able to answer this question. It's basically a matter of testing. It depends on how much you have, how many settings you have within your policies. But try to use as few as possible in your environment. In large enterprise environments, you sometimes have the issue where you have duplicated settings, where the one policy disables something, the other one it enables the same setting on a different level. If you have a more complex OU structure, try to avoid it, because it's just a waste of time. Anything when it comes to filtering. WMI filters on the policies themselves, but also if you use the item level targeting filters, they may completely reduce or actually increase your logon times. So be careful with those. Basically, any query that you do outside of the image is something that affects logon time in a negative way. Of course, there are also different ways. This is the last item on the screen, different ways to deal with user settings. You can use products such as Workspace Environment Manager and move away from group policies for user-based settings. There are 2 group policies that are definitely highly recommendable. You really want to set these group policies. These concern the synchronous versus asynchronous group policy processing. This is very important, both of these settings are very important, especially when it comes to remote desktop services. So the one on the left you want to enable. That means you want to have asynchronous processing instead of synchronous. The second policy, which is set to disable, the always wait for network, actually depends on the first one being disabled. So that's very important. Check it in your own environment. Perhaps a quick question. Next item, scripts. Who is using Logon scripts or any user-based script right now in their environment? Anything running for the user which is built on scripts? Okay, quite a few people. Now, if you're still using Logon scripts, and yeah, those are 2 settings to think about. On the one hand, on the left, very important, whether the desktop, the build-up of the desktop, is waiting for the Logon script to finish. That really makes a big difference when it comes to logon times. So make sure to configure it correctly. And also consider the fact that with operating systems from 2012 and higher, there is a bit of a change where a logon script by default has a 5-minute delay. So you want to reduce this to 0 in most cases. When it comes to scripts, there are also some other important things to say. I personally do not think that it's a problem to use scripts. Scripts can negatively impact performance, but if you do it correctly, they will not. First of all, you can use all kinds of scripts, the actual logon scripts or the sort of hidden logon scripts within a scheduled task. You can use run keys, the Active Directory object, and certain registry keys as well. Whatever you do, first consider, do I need this script? Or can I perhaps move it to a different product, like Workspace Environment Manager, or perhaps a third-party software? If you do use scripts, always try to optimize them as much as possible. That also means that you sometimes have to refactor existing scripts. that you have to take a look at the existing ones. They may contain some functionality for an older version of your Citrix product. It may be that they don't use if statements or, for example, where clauses. If you do a WMI check, then make sure to optimize this type of query using where clauses. Anything concerning LDAP queries can also negatively impact performance. Drive mapping, printer mapping, also one of those topics. This can also definitely have a negative effect. If possible, make them persistent. Also think about the fact, which sometimes happens in larger enterprises, that the actual drive mapping exists. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that a script is running simply because the share is not there anymore or has been perhaps renamed. So the next issue, very important, always consider antivirus. This may be overlooked sometimes, or maybe only configured for the VDA, but also a provisioning server requires certain antivirus configurations. Now, Citrix has a relatively new area in the Citrix, on the Citrix.com website, which is called Tech Zone, hardcore technical articles, so great for people like us. And the antivirus article there, that's the most relevant one. Take a look at that article. That's the best one you find out there. And the last item, which we covered partially in the last section, whatever is your profile solution, always take a look at the reference architecture. Make sure you optimize it the way it should be for that particular solution. Also an important part, we mentioned it in the beginning of this section. The thing is you optimize the image, but that's not the end of the story. Because most of us create a master image, and the master image at the end has to be deployed. Now you have to do, of course, a sealing, because otherwise the image is not going to be generic. Now that's a very important process. It's impossible for me to mention sealing and not to mention the base image script framework. This is one of the great community tools that we have. It's developed by Matthias Slim, who is actually sitting in the audience right there. So use the opportunity to talk to the developer. Yeah, definitely. Applause. Yeah, really. It's a really great tool, and it takes care of pretty much everything that you need to take care of when it comes to sealing. So removes Windows updates IDs and clears the event logs, takes care of DNS and ARP cache and stuff like that. So take a look. There are the links. Very nice tool. Brilliant. All right.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
So now we'll touch on some best practices and tips for app layering. Some general tips. Machine OS tools do not need upgraded when you upgrade the ALM appliance. If there are new scripts that have been released as part of the Machine OS tools, then yes, certainly you can do and upgrade the Machine OS tools. Otherwise, it's not necessary. When you publish a new image, the ALM drivers are automatically injected into the image at publishing time. You can use the export and import feature of app layering. You could use that to make use of secondary appliances, such as test environments or backup. If you're running an NGen update to finalize layers, if you use my script, you probably are. There is a bug where the packaging machine will run out of disk space. Citrix are aware of this bug. The workaround for now is disable caching on the connector that publishes out your packaging machine. Modifying into user.dat in multiple layers does not work. You can only do it in one layer because they don't merge. If you need to create user-based registry keys, I suggest using technologies such as group policy preferences or Citrix Workspace Environment Management. And do not create any users or groups in any layer other than the OS layer, as it's the only layer that can write to the SAM database. Some more tips when creating a directory junction: simply put in the domain name and it will scan all domain controllers in your environment. I see customers creating load balanced virtual servers for this purpose. It's unnecessary. So you just simply put in the domain name as shown in the screenshot. And when upgrading ALM, simply use snapshots as a rollback feature. This might sound like a simple tip, but customers actually do ask this question, and Citrix have said that snapshots is a valid rollback method. Elastic layers. So essentially, elastic layer is an application which is packaged into a virtual disk and then stored on the network. As the user logs on, that elastic layer disk is mapped to their session and they get access to the application. Some tips around that is Citrix recommend a 10 gigabit connection from the VDA to the file server, and also that the file server uses SMB3, which would be server 2012 R2 and above. Make sure that share is highly available using technologies such as Microsoft DFS. App Layering 414 loads elastic layers after logon. This is a new feature. Not all elastic layers will work with this method, so there is a compatibility mode that you can enable, which will then load the elastic layers during the logon time, as it did in previous versions. And don't depend on the elastic fit feature. If it tells you that an application won't work elastically, that does not necessarily hold true. The only way to truly determine is to carry out your own testing. Office 2016 cannot be used as an elastic layer. And you can reuse application layers with different OS layers, but that comes at your own risk. So for example, if you create an app layer with Windows 10 and try and use that on a 2016 OS layer, it might work, but if it doesn't, you'll not get any support from Citrix.
Okay, so we're on to section 5, which is tips and best practices around Google Chrome. Majority of people, to be honest, do use Google Chrome rather than IE for obvious reasons. So I guess there's always been a weird issue of, is actually Google Chrome supported in a Citrix environment? Kind of the screenshot that's shown there, it's kind of quite clear. It's on the Citrix Ready Marketplace. It is a supported product within a Citrix environment. So publishing Chrome, previous versions, you had a publish Chrome with the no sandbox job and the disabled GPU. But lucky enough, as of version 58, you don't need to do that anymore. And you can actually publish to the Chrome within the program files directory itself. Ever had that snap screenshot there? This only applies really in a 32-bit Chrome environment. On a 64-bit operating system, there's 2 executables that you can see there that actually need to be excluded in the Citrix API. And you'll see at the bottom there the support article from Citrix if you ever have that actual issue.
For some reason, vendors decided that it's quite a good idea to include executables in the user profile. I'm not quite sure how this happened, but it did. Also, Chrome has a tool called the Software Reporting Tool, which is part of the Chrome Cleanup tool. This is, of course, nicely located in the user profile, which was an interesting issue for me and in my environment. It was an Azure environment, but it's actually unimportant where the machine was running. We had a lot of blue screens and unexpected shutdowns of the virtual machines. Had no idea what was happening, so then you do your typical analysis, Windows debugging, and it ended up that this process was running unexpectedly at certain moments. The best thing is that this tool is actually not there in the profile in the beginning. It gets downloaded automatically on the background, so some profiles actually had it, some profiles did not include it, which was great. But you can disable this tool using the standard Chrome policies. So if you're using Chrome, then I highly recommend to disable these 2 settings there. Chrome, of course, has extensions. And these extensions, they do not have to be included in the master image because extensions are installed in the user profile. In order to manage the extensions, you can use group policies. The group policies, the Chrome ones, they are included in the Chrome bundle, which include both the installers. The bundle includes documentation as well as the ADMX files. You add them to your central group policy repository, and then you can manage Chrome nicely using many, many different policies. In order to add or to install an extension in the user's profile, you have to first of all use a user policy. As you see on the left side, it's another machine policy. And what you need in order to configure it is, on the one hand, an extension ID, and secondly, you need an update URL for any future update of this extension. At the bottom, you can see it a bit clearer. Now, the question is, how do you find out what is the extension ID? The easiest way is to simply install the extension on your test machine or your local machine, and to switch on the developer mode, as you see on the top right corner within the Chrome extensions page, and there you can see the ID. Or if it's installed, you go on to the left image there, you go to the user profile itself, and the extensions folder contains subfolders, and the name is the same as the extension ID. Then the second part is the update URL, which you can see in the bottom picture down there. It's included in the manifest.json file, which again is included in the folder, in the extension folder. So far, the update URL is always the same, so you can pretty much guess it's this one, but it's still always good to check. Resource consumption, always a fascinating topic, of course. Yeah, Google Chrome, of course, is a very powerful browser. It's also much more than a browser nowadays, in all honesty. It can even run like C++ applications and everything, so it's much more than it used to be. If you have 10 to 15 tabs open as a user, you will be using quite some RAM. There is a task manager included within Chrome, and this task manager helps you to identify which processes are actually, or which pages are using most of your RAM or CPU, and also the extensions. Maybe you have an extension running that is actually using 300 megabytes, for example. So use this task manager to identify which resources are consumed. There are some ways to deal with consumption. If you have a GPU in your physical machine, then Chrome is able to leverage this. As you can see there, the hardware acceleration is by default enabled. If you don't have a GPU, then one of the options is Workspace Environment Manager and using the CPU and RAM management feature. Also very powerful. And there's a third option as well. There are certain extensions that actually suspend active tabs. So the Great Suspender is one of those tools. There are more extensions out there, but that's also a very interesting one to use. The only small disadvantage may be that you cannot configure the settings using policy, so you can install the actual extension, but configuring the settings can only be done from the user side. What I also want to mention, this is definitely not unimportant, the relatively new feature from Citrix Browser Content Redirection. It was made available with Virtual Apps on Desktop 7.16, but it has also been made backward compatible. I think the only feature I know that's sort of backward compatible with 7.15 from update number 3. And what it actually does is pretty cool. It takes the so-called viewport of the browser, which is the actual window where you see the web page, and it leverages the HDX browser engine that's included in the Workspace app. So you install the Workspace app on your Windows machine. It includes the HDX browser engine, and that one is used to overlay the viewport, and thus it renders on the client side. Also very powerful. Take a look at it. Requires Workspace app 1808 and a 7.15 CU3 or higher. Very cool feature.
So Workspace Environment Management. I can't find a logo for WEM. So we got a guy scratching his head, because that was me at my computer a couple of weeks ago when I was trying to find an icon. Also, if I say anything incorrect, we have two guys, very smart WEM guys in front that are going to give me a hard time at the bar later. So I've got to make sure I say everything correctly. Who uses WEM? Quite a lot. OK. So I'm going to talk about three main features of WEM. One is logon time optimization. If we take a look at WEM, an environment without WEM, we see that when a user logs on, they have to go through a multitude of group policy appliances, printer mapping, logon scripts, and drive mapping, and so on. And then eventually they'll reach their desktop wallpaper. And this process can take anywhere from 40 to 80 seconds, or sometimes longer. In an environment with WEM, we essentially have the user who logs on to their desktop first, and then they get everything afterwards. So they get their printers, their drive maps, registry keys, and so on. That could take anywhere from 15 to 25 seconds, and then the user's environment builds afterwards. So that is a benefit number one. Number two is CPU management. There's There's going to be times where you have a rogue CPU or a process rather that consumes a lot of CPU. And this is where WEM can come in and help. What you can see here is the CPU usage limit is set to 70 with this CPU spikes protection and a sample time limit of 30 seconds. Essentially means if a process consumes more than 70% of my CPU for 30 seconds or longer, WEM will lower the priority of that process. And it's really good for file sharing, especially in shared desktop environments. There is also this intelligent CPU optimization feature, so WEM can track processes that continuously trigger this CPU spikes protection. That means when a process starts, subsequent times, the priority of that process is lowered automatically. And then memory management. Again, shared desktop environment, this could be of use. If we have a look at the left-hand side of the screen, we can see Internet Explorer, which is an idle process, and it's consuming 345 meg of RAM. If you times that by 100, 200 users, you can quickly see that there's going to be a lot of RAM wasted by idle sessions in your environment. If we use what's called the memory working set optimization, WEM can actually take back RAM from a process silently without affecting the application. So on the right, you can see that WEM has actually taken back almost 50% of RAM from that idle process. So that allows you to give RAM to active users in your environment for processes that are active. So that's another critical and important feature of WEM.
So that kind of concludes the main content. So don't forget to tweet about the session with the hashtags that you can see on screen. I guess from us three, thanks for your attention. Before we go, if you can get your mobile app out and submit online feedback, that would be great. We do have a few minutes left here, so we're happy enough to take a Q&A session.
Yep. If you have any questions, I think there's microphones up at the front.
Even better.
Yeah, great.
All right.
Thank you.